All right, so let's dive into this whole illegal immigration thing and how it impacts the U.S. economy. We've got some serious research here, like a study that was presented to the House Judiciary Committee,
Mm.
and the numbers are they're pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, data is key here, especially when we're talking policy. This isn't about opinions. We need to understand the real costs, the fiscal reality.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And the first thing that jumps out at you is just this huge surge in illegal immigration. It's not a small thing. We're talking big numbers. Since January 2021 alone, over 2.7 million people who shouldn't even be here, inadmissible they call them, have been released into the U.S.
Right.
Then you add the gotaways, the ones who slip past Border Patrol, that's another 1.5 million. And don't forget the visa overstays, which are also at record levels.
And what's really striking is how these numbers translate into the overall illegal immigrant population. By October 2023, it had surged to an estimated 12.8 million.
Wow.
That's a net increase of 2.6 million since January 2021. Think about it. That's basically adding a city the size of Houston to the illegal immigrant population in just under 3 years.
That's a crazy way to think about it. But it's not just about the numbers, is it? We need to understand what this influx means financially. And the study really digs into education levels as a major factor.
Absolutely. This is where we start to see the real economic consequences. The study shows that 69% of adult illegal immigrants haven't even finished high school. Compare that to 35% of U.S.-born residents.
So a huge difference in education levels.
Yeah.
But how does that translate into actual dollars and cents?
Well, lower education levels usually mean lower paying jobs, right? And that directly affects how much they're paying in taxes and whether they qualify for welfare programs. The study estimates that over their lifetime, each illegal immigrant creates a fiscal drain of about $68,000. That's taking into account all the taxes they pay throughout their lives, minus the cost of the services they use.
So even though they might be working, they're not contributing enough to offset the cost of services they receive.
Exactly. It's a complicated equation, and we have to consider all the factors involved. Like, there's this common idea that illegal immigrants don't use welfare, but the data tells a different story.
Really, they DO use welfare. I thought that was illegal.
It's not that straightforward. They might not be eligible for certain federal programs, but the reality is a lot of illegal immigrant households rely on some type of public assistance. The study found that 59% of these households use at least one major welfare program. Compare that to 39% of U.S.-born households.
That's a big difference. But before we jump to conclusions, let's be clear. We're not saying all illegal immigrants are lazy or trying to game the system. The study actually found that 94% of illegal immigrant households have at least one person working. That's even higher than the 73% for U.S.-born households.
Right, it's important to remember that. A lot of them are working, often in low-wage jobs, but those wages just aren't enough to support their families, so they need to rely on welfare.
Okay, so there are a lot of factors at play. But why is the rate of welfare use so high among illegal immigrants?
Well, a big part of it is that many of them have U.S.-born children who are automatically citizens and eligible for benefits. Then you have the differences from state to state. Some states offer Medicaid to certain illegal immigrants, and a few even have SNAP benefits under certain conditions.
So you've got kids qualifying automatically, plus different state policies making things even more complicated. And then there are programs like school lunches and WIC that are available to illegal immigrant children. It's a tangled web, that's for sure. But what about the costs beyond welfare? What else are we talking about here?
That's a crucial point. Public education is a huge expense. You've got 4 million children of illegal immigrants in public schools. The study says that cost taxpayers something like $68.1 billion just in 2019.
68 billion, wow.
Yeah,
And healthcare has got to be another big expense.
definitely. Many illegal immigrants don't have insurance, so they often end up in emergency rooms. That adds up to an estimated $7 billion a year for taxpayers.
So we've got education, healthcare, and welfare. It sounds like these costs are really starting to add up. But to be fair, illegal immigrants do contribute to the economy, don't they? They pay taxes, right?
They do. The study estimates that in 2019, they paid $5.9 billion in federal income tax, $16.2 billion in Social Security tax, and $3.8 billion in Medicaid taxes.
Those are big numbers. But I have a feeling it's still not enough to cover all those costs we talked about.
You're right, it's a net fiscal drain. But here's where it gets interesting. Illegal immigration actually increases the overall GDP. The study estimates it added $321 billion to the U.S. GDP in 2019.
Wait, hold on. A bigger GDP? That's a good thing, isn't it? Doesn't that mean everybody wins?
Not necessarily. The majority of that GDP increase goes directly to the illegal immigrants themselves through their wages. It doesn't automatically translate into benefits for the rest of the U.S. population.
So a bigger GDP doesn't necessarily mean everyone's benefiting equally?
Exactly. And this really highlights how complex this whole immigration debate is. There are economic contributions, yes, but there are also significant costs. And those costs often fall on taxpayers, especially those in communities that are heavily impacted by illegal immigration.
Yeah, we're seeing that play out in cities like New York, Chicago, and Denver. They're really struggling to deal with this influx of illegal immigrants.
Mhm.
Budget cuts, resources stretched thin, tough decisions about where to allocate funding. It's a real problem.
Absolutely. We need to move past these simplistic arguments and recognize that there are real trade-offs with any immigration policy. How do we balance the economic contributions of immigrants with the costs to taxpayers? That's the question.
That's a big question, one we definitely need to consider carefully. Now, before we move on, there's another important point we should touch on.
Okay, what is it?
We've been talking about the immediate costs, the ones we can see right now, but what about the long-term effects? Things like Social Security and Medicare.
That's a critical issue for sure. Right now, most illegal immigrants can't receive those benefits, even though they're contributing through payroll taxes. Their contributions are actually helping to support those programs.
So is that a good thing for Social Security and Medicare then?
In the short term, yes. But the study brings up an interesting point. If there was a widespread legalization of illegal immigrants, allowing them access to Social Security and Medicare, it could drastically change things.
Why is that?
It has to do with how those programs are structured. Both Social Security and Medicare have progressive benefit structures, meaning that lower earners and people with shorter work histories get a proportionally larger return on their contributions compared to higher earners.
I see. So if you suddenly legalize a large group of mostly lower wage workers, it could put a strain on those systems, which are already facing problems.
Exactly. And this is just one example of the long-term consequences that we often overlook in these immigration debates. The decisions we make today can have ripple effects for years to come.
It's all connected. But with potentially billions of dollars at stake, this is way more complicated than people realize.
You're absolutely right. That's why it's crucial to have these conversations,
Huh.
to understand the nuances and to consider both the immediate and the long-term impacts of immigration policy. It's interesting how all these economic things connect to these bigger social issues. We've been focusing on the money side of it, but there's a human side to this too that we can't ignore.
Yeah, you're right. It's easy to get caught up in the numbers and forget that we're talking about, people's lives,
Mhm.
both the people who are immigrating illegally and the people who are already citizens.
Exactly. And that brings us to something else that often gets overlooked, the impact on the countries people are coming from. What happens when you have millions of people, often the most ambitious ones, leaving their home countries? What does that do to those societies in the long run?
Hmm, that's a good point. We tend to only think about the effects here in the U.S., but there's a whole other side to the story.
For sure. It's a global issue. It's not just about us. Like, imagine a small town in Mexico or in Central America. A lot of their young people have left to find jobs in the U.S. What does that do to their economy, to their community?
It's going to have a huge impact. Makes you realize that what we decide about immigration here affects a lot more than just the
Yeah,
U.S.
absolutely. It's all connected. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about something else that worries people. Crime.
Okay, yeah, that's a big one. Whenever you talk about illegal immigration, crime always comes up.
And it's a complicated issue. Some studies say that immigrants, even illegal ones, actually commit fewer crimes than people born in America. But there are also real concerns about criminal activity connected to border crossings and the drug trade.
So it's not as easy as saying, oh, all illegal immigrants are criminals, or that they're all, angels. It's more complicated than that.
Right. And we need to be open-minded about it, look at the evidence, even if it challenges what we think we know.
Good point. We can't let our own biases or fears get in the way of seeing the facts.
Exactly. Now, before we get too deep into the crime stuff, let's go back to something you said before. How illegal immigration affects the places where it's happening the most.
The communities on the front lines.
Yes, we talked about big cities like New York and Chicago, Denver, but what about those smaller towns, the ones along the border? They're the ones dealing with the most immediate problems, property damage, worries about safety.
It's easy to focus on the big economic picture and forget about what it's actually like for people living in those communities.
It is, and we should remember that those communities aren't all the same either. People have different opinions, different experiences. Some people might welcome new workers. Others might feel like it's putting too much strain on their schools, their hospitals.
It's complicated, for sure. And it's important to hear everyone's side of the story. Try to understand the whole picture.
Absolutely. Now, I know we've been mostly talking about this one study, but it's good to remember that not everyone agrees on this issue.
Right, we've been really digging into the information that was given to the House Judiciary Committee, but that's just one perspective.
Exactly. Some economists say that illegal immigration actually benefits the U.S. economy overall. They say illegal immigrants often take jobs that Americans don't want and that they help the economy grow by working and spending money.
Yeah, I've heard that argument before. They're doing the jobs Americans won't do. Is there any truth to that?
There is some truth to it, but we also have to think about how it affects wages and working conditions for both illegal immigrants and American workers in those low-paying jobs.
Good point. It's not just about filling jobs. It's about making sure everyone has a fair chance and that the labor market is healthy.
Exactly. And there are ethical questions, too. Is it okay to have a system where millions of people are living and working in secret, where they could be taken advantage of?
That's a tough question. It feels like whichever way you look at it, there are these difficult choices.
You're right. There are no easy answers when it comes to immigration. But that's exactly why we need to be talking about this, looking at the evidence, having real discussions.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've looked at how complicated illegal immigration is, how much it costs, all the different opinions on it.
And we've talked about the challenges, but we've also talked about how important it is to be understanding and look for solutions.
And I think that's really important. This isn't about blaming people or making this issue seem simpler than it is. It's about having an honest conversation based on facts and evidence. It's about trying to find a way forward that works for everyone, the new people coming here and the people who are already here.
I agree, and I think that leads us perfectly to the last part of our discussion. We've talked about the costs, the complications, but what about solutions? What can we actually do to address the problems caused by illegal immigration, while still staying true to what America stands for?
That's the question, isn't it? It's a big one. Join us for part 3, where we'll finish up our look at illegal immigration and what it means for America, and we'll explore some ways we might be able to move forward.
Okay, so we've really dug into this whole illegal immigration issue. The costs, the impact on different communities, all the different angles, but what do we do about it? Where do we even start?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And there's no simple answer. But I think if we can understand the complexities, we can at least start to figure out a better way forward, a more humane approach.
Okay, so let's throw some ideas around. What are some of the things we need to focus on?
Well, I think the first thing is we've got to secure the border. I'm not necessarily talking about a wall, like some people say. But we need to invest in technology, more Border Patrol agents, better infrastructure, make it harder to just walk across.
Right, so if fewer people are coming in illegally, it'll ease some of the pressure on those communities that are bearing the brunt of it. Exactly. And it could also make things safer for the people who try to cross illegally, less chance of being exploited by smugglers and traffickers.
Okay, so border security is a good starting point.
Yeah.
But what about the people who are already here? The millions of undocumented immigrants already living in the U.S.?
Yeah, that's where it gets really complicated. You've got people saying we should deport everyone, others saying we should give them a path to citizenship.
Two very different approaches, and a lot of gray area in between.
Exactly. And each option comes with its own set of problems. Mass deportation. Logistically, it's a nightmare. And ethically, it's a tough one. But a path to citizenship, well, what about the people who came here illegally? Is it fair to them? And if it's not done carefully, it could overload our social services.
So it sounds like we need to find a balance.
Yeah.
Something in between those two extremes. Something that combines enforcement with compassion.
I think that's the key. We need a system that makes it clear you can't just come here illegally, but also gives people who are already here a chance to come out of the shadows, a chance to be a part of society, to contribute.
How do we actually do that, though? What would that look like?
One idea is a kind of tiered system for legalization. People who meet certain requirements, like paying taxes, learning English, passing a background check, they could get legal status, maybe even a path to citizenship eventually. But people who don't meet those requirements, well, they could face penalties, maybe even deportation.
That sounds like a pretty reasonable approach.
Yeah.
But what about preventing illegal immigration in the future? How do we address the root causes? The reasons why people are leaving their home countries in the first place?
That's a big piece of the puzzle. We need to invest in those countries, help them develop their economies, reduce poverty, give people more opportunities so they don't feel like they have to risk their lives just to have a chance at a better life.
So it's not just about walls and deportations. It's about tackling the underlying problems that are forcing people to migrate.
Exactly. It's about finding a solution that benefits everyone, the U.S. and the countries people are coming from.
This all sounds good, but how do we get from talking about it to actually doing something? How do we make these solutions a reality?
That's the hard part. It takes political will, it takes people from both sides of the aisle working together, and it takes a willingness to compromise.
And it takes people like us, everyday citizens, being informed and engaged. We need to look past the sound bites and really think about this issue.
Well said. And that's what we've been trying to do in this deep dive. We've explored all the angles of illegal immigration, the costs, the benefits, the different perspectives. But at the end of the day, it's up to us to decide what we want to do about it.
So let's keep talking about it. Let's stay informed. Let's talk to our elected officials. Let's work together to create an immigration system that truly reflects our values as a country.
I like that. A call to action. And remember, immigration is never simple. There are no easy answers. But if we come at it with empathy, with an open mind, and with a willingness to find common ground, we can build a future where everyone has the chance to succeed. Newcomers and those who've been here all along.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into illegal immigration and its impact on America. We hope this has given you some things to think about, maybe some new information, and even a little bit of optimism that we can find solutions to these tough problems. So until next time, keep those brains working. All right.